Hello everybody, welcome back to another watercolor pencil tutorial with me, Roar. So how's it going everybody? Today we're going to be coloring Waluigi. I drew him over here, so we're ready to go. Before we continue, just let me remind you that if you want to follow along, you can download the line art down below in the description. There's going to be a link to my Discord server where you'll find a channel called tutorial files or file tutorials, one of those two. In there you'll find every line art for every tutorial that I've done so far. So if you ever want to follow along, you can go ahead and print them out in watercolor paper or trace them however you want, and you can follow along. The names of the pencils, the colors are going to appear somewhere in this area as I'm going along. I'm going through the tutorial, so you can know what I'm using. These are all Prismacolor watercolor pencils. I bought them a while back. I'm not sure how much they are, to be honest, but these are what I use now. Prismacolor are pretty good, and they have a pretty good pigment. So let's move on to coloring Waluigi. I drew him a little bit too high, but it's fine. On your line art, it'll be centered. So Waluigi and Wario, they do have a little bit more color than Mario and Luigi. Okay, so yeah, so Waluigi is a bit more complicated in the same vein as Wario. So they have like a bit more colors going on, like at least three colors going on. The thing about Waluigi though is that Waluigi is mainly dark in colors. So we only have purple. I chose indigo blue because his overalls are like bluish, kinda pink for his nose, yellow for the L that he has, and then the buttons, brown for his hair, the light blue for the eye shadow here, and orangey for his boots. We'll figure out. And then the skin tone, that's all the colors that we're going to use. And then over here we have our trusty ballpoint pen and our number 3 brush, and there's some water here. Now let's start off with the first color, which is going to be violet. Violet was the only one that I had that was more like Waluigi wears. And as always, we're going to apply a flat layer of colors. So no extra details, just color, so we can visualize better. At least this is what helps me visualize better what the end result is going to look like. I always find that it is better to have all the colors laid out before you do any details. So that's what we're going to do with every single color. And like I said, I'm going to tell you what the name of each pencil is, and it'll show up at the bottom of the screen. This is indigo blue. I forgot to do his hat with the purple, so we'll go back. Okay, now we're going to do the nose with pink. Now we're going to do all the yellow details with canary yellow. His hair with terracotta. Now the eyeshadow with non-photo blue. This is just that strip over here. You can use the one blue all over it, like the same blue over here, but it's up to you. Now we're going to do the shoes with orange. If I have to make it a little bit darker, I'm going to apply some of that brown that we used for his hair, and I'll show you how. And now we're going to do the skin tone with, as usual, our go-to colors are going to be, at least for this type of skin, light peach and cream. We apply these one at a time. It doesn't really matter which one you pick first. It's just pick one or the other and then adjust as you're coloring. I'm going to start off with cream. Cream is usually a bit more yellow than the peach, so that's why I have to kind of like balance it out, because the cream by itself is too yellow for a skin tone. So just put it here, and you can kind of put a lot of pressure on the skin tone because they're so light that they don't really pop that much when you wet them. And now, so it looks kind of yellow. Now I'm gonna apply this pink on top of it, and that's gonna drive the yellow down a bit more from the cream color, and it'll make it look a bit more natural, you know? don't stress over too much though. Just color it, make sure that everything is covered. So now, what we'll do now is look at the picture, see where you want your light to fall, and apply a darker layer of that color where you want the shadows to be. And before we continue, I'll explain to you how light sources would work and how they would cast shadow in a simple way of sorts. So depending on where your light source comes from, it's going to dictate where your shadows are cast. To illustrate this, let's just pretend that the tip of the pencil is going to be your light source and everything else over here is going to be the shadow. So if your light is coming from here, your shadow is going to cast this way. And anything that's facing away from the light will have a shadow cast. So if you follow this direction for your light, being from here, top left to the bottom, all of this part right here, these edges that are facing the light source are going to be lighter than the ones that are facing away or not directly facing the light. Right? So if you want to switch to the light source, just kind of like turn it around. So wherever your light source is, the opposite is going to be where the shadows cast. And that's pretty much it. So you can kind of decide where you're going to put your shadows. Usually for me, I'll put the shadows on the top right corner. I mean, the light comes from the top right corner for the most part, unless I want to achieve a certain look. Alright, so now we're going to apply a little more pigment on the side where the shadows would be based on where you decided to put your light source. So we're just going to darken the area where the shadows are going to be, and then we'll even it after. Now it's just to identify where your shadows are going to be. So for this part right here, since it's underneath the ear, it's going to have a shadow, even though it may be more towards where the light is, so you get some light. But since it's underneath another area of the face or of the body, you have to put a bit of a shadow so you can kind of pull them apart. Same thing here, so you have to put it on the opposite end and underneath the face. Okay, so after you apply the darker layer of pigment, what I like to do is just to go over it a bit again with a light pass of color, just so that the light layer that we placed in the beginning of the process gets a bit more filled in, and that way when we put water on it, we don't lose so much pigment and we retain a rich color for his outfit. So this second pass is not going to be as dark as your shadows, but it's going to enrich what was already there. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for every color, so I'll speed it up all together so you can see the final look of this with the dry pencils. So again, just make sure that you follow your light source wherever that may be. Mine just comes from the top right, and everything opposite that is going to be the shadows. Another thing about shadows is that, so in this cylindrical part, even though, since your light source right now is coming from this way, the bottom shade is going to be, the shadow is going to be thicker than the top. And you can kind of like do it like this, like a curved line starting from where your shadows are originating from, and just follow the edge on the bottom. So that way you can tell that the light comes from this area. That's what I did here in every other cylindrical form. Okay, so then there we have it. You can see where the shadows are going to be, because these are the darker areas. On this area like this, you have shadows in almost every direction, because this shadow over here is the contact shadow from the arm on top of the leg. This is the shadow that's being cast by the face being on top of the leg. This is just the shadow of the leg itself because it's facing down. And this is the shadow from your actual light source. Here I applied some shadows by the fingers because I forgot to do that before, but those are the contact shadows, so they have to be a bit darker than the rest of the body, I mean the leg. Alright, so now we have that done for the blue and the purple. The orange, I mean, he does have orange shoes, so we're just going to leave it orange for now. I mean, we had Wario wear green shoes, so orange is fine. For the shoes, you don't have to necessarily worry about the shadows, because then with the pen, we're going to add some shadows anyway to the whole picture. Alright, so that's that. Alright, now we're going to move on to our handy dandy water. Water, we're going to apply it with a number 3 brush. You can use a bit bigger if you have it printed out bigger than this. Mine is tiny, so a 3 is enough. and we're gonna go all over the picture. I personally like to, depending on what the area is, I like to pull from the dark side to the lighter side, just because watercolor pencils allow you to move some of the pigment with your water brush. So depending on how you move your brush is how the pigment will also move. So the logic behind why I do dark to light is because if I do it from the light to the dark, I can end up moving all the pigment from the light area to the dark, and then it'll narrow the shadow and make a dark line on the edge here. And that's not necessarily what I want. I want a more even gradient on the actual body. And even if when you wet it, if you see the shadows are not going to be as dark as you would have expected, don't worry about it. We'll fix it with the ballpoint pen at the end. Okay, so now we're going to start wetting the brush. The brush has to be wet enough. It doesn't have to be dripping wet. You can get away with using very little water with these things. The only time that I worry about how much water my brush has is when I'm doing a large background area with watercolor pencils, because you want to move fast so you don't have any remaining brush strokes. When I use the brush on dark colors like the brown, or like a very vivid color like the pink, I like to clean my brush, just because sometimes you can dirty the next color that you're gonna wet, especially if I'm going from like brown to pink and then to the face color. The face color is very light, so any bit of pink would kind of mess it up, or could mess it up. Alright, so that's it. That's what we need the water for. Now, at this point, the way that I make the line art for every one of these tutorials is that if you want to stop at this point, by all means, you can do so. The line art works, so you can leave it like this and it'll look like a complete picture, especially if you did your shadows with a pencil beforehand. Otherwise, if you want to keep going, you can just stay with me and we'll use the pen to make more details on the picture. You do have to let it dry first, so let it dry before you do it, otherwise it'll take a bit more, because the pen won't be able to apply enough ink. And one of the ways that I learned right now, actually today, how to tell whether or not your paper is wet enough, it's still wet, is if you touch it and it feels cool, then it means that it has water still there that it's not dry. Since I'm kind of like pressed for time, I use just regular tissue paper, and you can just tap it when it's a bit dry and just get rid of any moisture. It doesn't come up with any color, it's just you're drawing the water out. It's still going to be wet, but we're going to do it. But again, at home, let it dry, or use a, I don't know, hair dryer or something, but let it dry before you apply it. This is a regular ballpoint pen. You can get them at any convenience store, anywhere that you can buy school supplies. They're cheap. They come like in a pack of 10 for like $2. All right. Now you just pick a random spot to start. There's no rhyme or reason as to where you start. It's just wherever you feel more comfortable. I'm just gonna put a line somewhere and then go all around the entire drawing just to emphasize certain lines. And you can use lines to also help you indicate or show where shadows are on the picture, because the darker and thicker the line, then that will tell the viewer or your audience or yourself that that line is representing a darker area of the actual drawing. So as I'll go, like I said, I'm going to go around the entire drawing, going over with a ballpoint pen and tweaking these lines as I see fit. Yeah. So another thing you can do with this pen, or any pen in general, when things overlap like this, or the face of on top of the arm and so forth, you can do this kind of thing, like a little curve from the edge of the body that's underneath to what's above it. So then that way, when you look at it, you can tell right off the bat that it's a shadow, and that's something that's either behind it or underneath it. So that's how you can play with the drawing using a ballpoint pen or any sort of pen that you want to use to make lines. Alright, so that's it for the initial pass through with the pen. I don't know if you can see, but now you have a lot of like darker lines on the other side from where our light is coming from. Now we're gonna do cross hatching. How I do usually cross hatching is I first apply so if I start off with a diagonal line like this, I'll try to apply one layer of shadow all around it, because cross hatching requires at least 2 lines so they can kind of cross like that. But I like to identify the shaded areas with just 1 line first, and then I'll go over it so I can make them darker. So again, same thing that I did with the pen and the line work. You just pick a side, a place where you want to start off from, and just start doing little flicks of your wrist like this. So you don't want to make an entire line, but you just kind of want to flick the wrist, flick the wrist, not flick the wrist. Flick the wrist, and then just apply the shadows to where you think you would need them, and that's totally up to you. So anything that's facing away from the light gets a few of these flicks. As you can see already, you can kind of have the shadow already showing up. And with the lines, follow the contour of where you're placing them. So since the leg is facing this way, so it's a cylinder like this on this side. So this is the shape, right? So cylinder this way. So my lines are gonna follow that shape, that contour. Here for the leg, I start off with the flick, but it's going to be a short, and then it slowly gets wider as you move down. And then when you reach the end, you're going to make that same curvature, but going from the long lines all the way to the shorter lines. See? So start short, it widens out, and then it shortens out again at the end. That's when you want to make a little curve. You always make the ends kind of thinner than the middle, and you can make a curve. For example, here I'm going to start off like a long line, and then as I'm getting to his belly area, shorter and shorter. Okay, so that was the first pass all over his body. I'm going to put a bit on his face, but I personally I like to be careful with the face, because if you put too many lines or too heavy a line, you'll darken the face too much and it just looks wrong. So the cross hatching gets applied in the same manner more or less, but with less pressure on your pen. That way you don't have so dark lines. So see here, they look very, very light, probably in the camera, but it's dark enough already for my sight that I can see that there's a shadow there. Same thing with the nose, because you don't want to get rid of like the color of the face, you know. Okay, so now same thing that we did right now, but we're going to do it in the opposite direction. So if you have to twist your picture, do it. It's just whatever you have to do to make it more comfortable for you to do the opposite direction. So I'm going to twist it around as I go along, and then after this you'll see what it looks like at the end. So I'll see you in a little bit. The teeth, they look too white, so you have to compensate for that, otherwise they look unnatural. So For the teeth, you can still shade them, but these are going to be more like little dabs they're going to do on the edge where it's further away from the light source, just so you can kind of have some shadow on the teeth, because the teeth are not a flat surface either. And that's about it. That's our final form of this piece right now. Here it's a little lighter, so sometimes like I'll go over with the pen very lightly, and that adds a bit of like a shade of black, so kind of darkens it. But yeah, at this point you're totally done. I think you have completed every step of the process. You don't have to do this. I just put 2 little pigment on there so it looks darker, I mean lighter. And that's it. This is all you do for the complete product. You could add a shadow at the bottom, kind of like to ground them somewhere. I don't like them like that. I like to have these characters kind of float around like this. But yeah, that's it. This is it. You've made a complete piece. You've colored it successfully, and you should have a pretty legitimate looking Waluigi in front of you. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you have any remaining questions, please leave them in the comments below. Once again, download the line art so you can follow along. It's going to be in the Discord channel. That's linked at the bottom. And yeah, let me know what other characters you would want to see. I'm going to stick with Nintendo for a bit longer, just so I can have like the whole crew. And from then on, we'll move on to other characters from other series. So once again, thanks so much for coming by. Thank you so much for watching, and like, subscribe, and you also watch me live on Twitch on weekends. So I'll see you soon.